almost all our money, 97% or so, comes from bank debt. Or, to be more accurate, the bank system's debt. So the normal way where money is created is when someone, a private individual, a business, or government, goes to a bank and borrows money. And that is when money is created. I'm saying a banking system which includes also, besides the banks, the central bank, because quantitative easing, which has been well known now, is being the central bank stepping in and creating also money the same way, but channeling that money only to the financial sector. So that has been the way it has happened so far. Money is definitely not neutral. Actually, they don't say that it's neutral. They don't talk about it. It's implicit, which is even more effective rather than saying neutral. Money is probably the most emotional thing that we have created, with sex, I would say, but at that same level. So, it's very, very powerful motivation tool. It's a very emotionally laden tool. And we all have a story around money. Your experiences around it, either because you had it or you didn't have it, or your family didn't have it, or had it, will determine a hell of a lot of your own story on the emotional field. So it's certainly not a neutral tool. And the subtlety by which it happens is that money has to be scarcer than its usefulness. In other words, that is conventional money. Bank debt money needs to be scarcer than its usefulness. Now, that means that actually there shouldn't be enough money. If there was enough money for everybody, it would become worthless. It would be hyperinflation. So, what I'm saying here, that bank debt money needs to be scarcer than its usefulness, comes straight from an economic textbook on monetary theory. So, straight, it's not my opinion. Well, the way that the scarcity is created is very indirect and very subtle, but very, very effective. The way money is created is when someone makes you a loan. Say you go borrow 100,000 euros to buy an apartment. That is when the moment when the money is created. But you're supposed to bring back 200,000 over the next 20 years. That second 100,000 is never created. It's someone else's principle. So when you're reimbursing a loan with interest, and you're paying the interest of the loan, you're using up someone else's principle. So by definition, there cannot be enough money because there is actually the interest component is never created. And that creates a scarcity in the whole system, which typically also falls on the people who make less money, of course. So that's where the scarcity is mostly felt. What has happened since the deregulation of the financial markets back in 1971 by Nixon, when he detached the money creation process in the dollar from even the fictitious possibility that was backed by money, by gold, the financial sector is finding a lot easier to make a lot of money playing with money, speculating with money. It takes less effort than trying to do it in the real market, particularly for small businesses, particularly for people who are not having a lot of money. They're not interesting. So, again, that's how it manifests. So we are actually dealing with a process that is part of the nature itself on the creation of money. I would claim no. There are several ways by which the money creation process and the money system itself actually is antagonistic with what we would call sustainability. First of all, the money creation process is pro-cyclical. So it means that when there is a boom period, when whatever the field is, it becomes interesting for the banks to create more money for that particular field, whether it's a particular country or whether it's a particular segment, like real estate. So when the central banks are supposed to try to counteract that by giving signals to the market through interest, but that is very a weak way of controlling the way money is created, because it still is in the hands of the private sector. And they find it interesting to create more money when there is a boom. On the opposite, when there is a recession, they have no interest in creating money at all. So it makes the recession worse. So this pro-cyclical process amplifies the cycle. There is a business cycle that is a small fluctuation, but when you have the money creation process, part of it, it becomes much bigger. So that's not particularly helpful for sustainability, because it actually creates problems on both sides, when there's a boom and when there is a bust. The second part is the short-term thinking. As money is created with interest, and interest makes it the future not important financially. If I tell you you can have €1,000,000, but I give you to 100 years from now, discounted to today with an interest rate, say, of 5%, which is a more typical one than we have now, well, that buys you a pizza. In the long term, we discount the process of money with the interest rate included. Because $100 now is going to be worth 105 a year from now, or 105 is going to be worth only 100 today. So this is the discounting process that makes short-term thinking rational. And we're all programmed to think short-term. That's actually the third factor. Because of interest again, the growth is necessary to stay in the same place. If you don't have growth, people will go bankrupt because the money doesn't exist to reimburse them. And again, it has to do with interest. Okay? If I have to reimburse the interest on money on the debt that's created, that interest needs to come from additional growth, from additional money, which is new loans to someone. And that will only happen when you have growth. So we're obliged to grow just to stay in the same place with the current money system. So the answer is growth is necessary. It has been a good thing, actually. It has created the whole industrial age, which has been a growing. We have increased our standards of material living extraordinarily. We live like kings used to do 500 years ago. However, we can't stop. If it stops, everybody goes bankrupt. I'm interested in monetary systems because I think it is the hidden persuader in all our activities. I think it conditions what we can do and how we can do it. And I believe the way we have been doing it is not going to work in the future. And I think we can reorient the system. We need to have a systemic solution to a systemic problem. The problem is systemic. It's usually not accepted as such. Economists don't see it because they consider the money system as a given, not as a variable, not a decision variable. And I think that is changing now, fortunately. It's about time, because where we're going now obligatorily, with the current system, we are obliged to go in a particular direction, like growth, on a material level. It's not going to work. And when I got interested in the issues of the challenges to humanity in the 21st century, I came to the conclusion that we need to change the monetary system to meet those challenges. That was my very first book back in, published in 20 years ago, called The Future of Money, and actually was dealing specifically with those challenges and with that solution. What's interesting, to me at least, when I discovered that, is that the monetary system is the same in the capitalist and in the communist zones. Okay? The only difference is that in the communist countries, the banks are owned by the government all the time. In capitalist countries, the banks are owned by the government only after they have collapsed, and for a period until they recover and they can go private again. That's the only difference. The system is actually the same. In the Soviet Union or under Maoist China, banks were creating money with interest through debt, just like they do in the West, just like they do in the capitalist countries. So not only we do have a monopoly being in the hands of banks, but it's actually universal. And it has been programmed, and the programs that we have in it are considered part of human nature. People think that human nature thinks short term, okay, for example, or that instability is part of the process by which we need to live, because that is the way things are. They are under this particular system. They are not, in my opinion, part of human nature, or not part of the divine creation, whatever you want to call it. It is the consequences of the existing system. So by changing the system, we can actually correct all these different challenges. The shortest way to describe what I propose is that we need to go from a monoculture to an ecosystem, a monetary ecosystem. And the rules apply to both, the same rules, natural rules. Okay? The work I've done with Babulanovic on a theoretical level has demonstrated that in any complex flow network, and an economy is a complex flow network in which money circulates, nobody is going to argue with that. It's just like a natural ecosystem where biomass circulates. It's also a complex flow network. Or like the distribution of electricity. That's a complex flow network in which electrons circulate. All these complex flow networks, whatever the flows in it, have certain minimum conditions for stability. And the minimum conditions include a minimum of diversity. So humanity has been condemning itself to monoculture in the monetary domain, and we would have the same very dangerous situation if we were applying it in the natural domain. If you decide that all trees need to be only pines, I think we're going to have a very non-sustainable planet from trees. So, but we're doing it with money, and we don't see the relationship. And in fact, there is a relationship. It's not a metaphor. It is the rule, just like with Newton did not define a relationship between an apple and a moon. He said there's a universal law, that the weight of the apple and the weight of the moon actually interact with the planet Earth in the same way. It is the same principle, the same rule, the same law of nature. And in fact, we have a law of nature of complex flow networks, that you need a minimum level of diversity. And one is not enough. And diversity of the nature of money and the creators of money. So that is where we are. And I think we're going to be learning this the hard way, i.e. by trying everything else before we actually address the fundamental issue. That seems to be what we're ready to do. We're going to try every other solution except touching the money system. I think. And still hoping to have a different result. I think Einstein said that that's a sign of madness. Trying to do the same thing over and over again and expecting different results. Well, we have alternatives already. I'm not going to describe it on a theoretical level. There are systems that have been operating for a long, long, long time. My favorite example is Switzerland, which is definitely a capitalist and a normal country. I would say, it's not some kind of a strange Basuto land. And we have for 80 years now a dual currency system with the behaviour system. And what has been proven, this is not, again, opinion, what has been proven is that the existence of the behaviour system counterbalances, stabilizes the conventional money system by having a counter-cyclical process. In other words, the opposite of what happens in our normal money. When there is a boom period, the quantity of behaviour transactions drops. When there is a recession, the quantity of behaviour transactions increases, and the number of participants increases. So we actually have a counter-cyclical process that stabilizes the full economy. This is not theory, this is actually demonstrated, and it's working to this day. So having a second system already helps. Now, I think that 2 is probably not enough, but we don't need 1,000 either. Okay? I think we need probably half a dozen systems, business to business and some business to consumers and some consumer to consumer, so that they actually have different types of processes that together will create a much more stable system than what we do have now. Yeah. So that's what I call a monetary ecosystem. I think it has to do with power, but also it's a taboo. The taboo topic, money is a taboo topic. It has been a taboo on a private level. It's considered more improper to ask you where your money comes from and how much you have. It's actually considered today more improper than with whom did you sleep last night. Okay, it used to be at the same level. All right, before the sexual revolution of the 70s. But today it's still there. People are very uncomfortable talking about money on a private level. And even on a collective level, economists are being trained to consider the existing money system as a given. And by having the definition of money through its functions, it locks it in. In addition, the power is expressed very discreetly. Most people don't even know where money comes from. They don't know aware of it. Banks are presented as intermediaries, not creators of money. It's not true. So we're being educated not to see it, not to look there. Just like the magician is having a handkerchief that he moves around all the time in order to attract the attention there, rather than what's really happening, where it's just there. Yeah. It creates competition. It creates fighting between people by definition. Okay, so then in this system you need to have losers. And who's going to be the loser? Well, and in fact we could create a system that does not have losers. The losers are not necessary for economic purposes. They are a consequence of what we have, and Schumpeter has been saying, that creative competition, quote unquote, is a good thing. I agree with that. That's a good thing, but is it true in everything? Why would we not be able to have, why do we need to compete in order to learn? We could all learn. Probably, there's no loss by anybody for the fact that you also know something. In fact, it might make our conversation more interesting, period. But we apply it to everything. Well, there are goods that are scarce physically, okay? I mean, real estate is one. If I live on that corner, you can't live on that corner, okay? We can't live together on the same place, It will not work. But that's physical things. That's not true in the intellectual level, but we're trying to make it that way by things like copyright and stuff like that, that tries to create scarcity in domains where there is none. And that is done for monetary reasons, to give value to something that should be cheap. I believe we should actually have cheap things, period. When it's not eating up resources that are scarce, why should we not have an infinite amount of beauty and a level of learning? Why could we not all have 3 PhDs if you want to? Why does that have to be scarce? There's no reason. There's also wounds of money for the people who have a lot of money. So everybody is getting wounded in this stuff. What happens, and typically normal people like us have a lot easier time to understand the scarcity of money because we have experienced it, okay? But the wound of very wealthy people is very systematic. I have been dealing with a workshop with inheritors of large fortunes in America, and all of them, without exception, are wounded in the way that I'm going to describe now. There's no exception. The first one is, if it is known that you have money, there's a whole bunch of societal expectations about you. You are invited. You're invited. Your checkbook was invited. Okay? And it's a difference. Okay? And if you forgot your checkbook, you're not welcome, So you say, my name is Rockefeller, and I make a reservation in a restaurant, and I go there. There's a whole series of expectations with whom I am going to be there, the kind of tip I'm supposed to leave, and all that stuff. Okay? Societal expectations. Friends. Do I have friends, or are these friends conditional on the fact that I have a lot of money? How do I find out? Would that person still be my friend if I didn't have money? Trust is the issue. Okay? Trust in society, trust with your friends. You don't know whether you have friends. You're not sure of having friends. The reason that they hang together is typically for that, because it eliminates that doubt. Okay? Given that we're all billionaires, well, you're not a friend of mine because of my billion, because you also have billions. All right? So you see the process. Family. Almost invariably, there are exceptions, but they're rare. In wealthy families, money is used as a tool for control. If you marry that girl, you're off my list, huh? Okay? So in other words, even the most intimate relationships, like getting married, are conditional to contracts before you get married. So, and it's pretty serious, okay? I mean, typically it's a patriarchy that there's a guy grandfather who controls the strings, okay, and plays with that stuff. And very often it happens. It's a cliche, but it's rare that it's not the case. It's the case with Trump's family, for example, if you want to give one example. I met his daughter. Okay, so and finally, it's about you. You're not supposed to do anything, right? You have money, right? So who are you? How, how I could not work for the rest of my life, but you identify yourself in a particular field. You have a domain in which you want to become good and all that stuff. It doesn't exist in that domain, and therefore your identity, you don't trust yourself. So it's a breakdown of trust on all levels. This is what I call the wounds of money, for having money, which is different from the one, but they both are wounds and can go very deep. Anything outside of your intimate circle is affected by money. Okay, within a family, normally, mom doesn't get paid for preparing breakfast. Okay, and if she were getting paid, I think that would be the end of the family. Okay, so in other words, everything outside of the direct family or the very close friends in which we don't use money is affected by that. And it changes our relationship into a competition. We're all competing for a scarcity of money that is actually artificially maintained and creates an undertow in society. I've been making the historical analysis of where the process of money started. And we need to classify it between two different types of societies. If you have patriarchal societies, in all patriarchal societies, we have actually had a monopoly of a currency with interest. It actually is a suction device to concentrate resources at the top. It's automatically done without people being aware of it. Okay? You're not aware that the money is being, so you just have the scarcity that you're filling with, but the money is actually sucked up, the resources are sucked up to the top. And it's logical in a patriarchal society, given that the top has all the power and tries to maintain the power. And you need a whole army to guarantee that.
How is it sucked up? How does this work?
Well, one of the mechanisms is interest. If everyone has to borrow money, by definition, he pays more than what he got, or he pays more money out, the interest back, and that interest goes to people who have money. So it's automatic. Okay, it's implicit. In matrifocal societies, and I use the word matrifocal because matriarchal societies have never existed. The only example that everybody knows is the Amazons, which is a mythology. It's never happened. We never have had a sociological example of Amazons, of women having all the power and actually suppressing the male completely. That doesn't happen. Matrifocal societies are societies in which the feminine is being honored. And the easiest way to find out is to find out what the vision of the Godhead is. What is the divine form? If the divine form takes the form of a male with a beard and is alone, creating everything by himself, you're probably in a patriarchal society. Okay? While if you have the nice role being played by a lady, like Isis in Egypt, or in the Central Middle Ages, for whom it was for Mary that cathedrals were built, not for Jesus Christ or for the Pope. And I found one example in China, the Tang dynasty, which from 700 to 900 AD was the only dynasty that had actually a woman becoming emperor. And in all these cases, Egypt, Central Middle Ages, and in the Tang Dynasty, we had a monetary ecosystem. We had what I'm recommending, i.e., we had different types of money circulating in parallel. One of them was identical to the patriarchal society, and very often was the money of the patriarchal neighbors. Okay? And the second one was a currency that had a penalty for being accumulated, a negative interest rate. And therefore, you had a motivation. Nobody had a motivation to accumulate that money. On the contrary, they wanted to get rid of it. So it circulated all the time. So that took different forms in the three civilizations. In the Egyptian system, that was mostly based on food. In the Central Middle Ages, there were special currencies called the mérou in French that are specifically popular currencies and that had no intrinsic value. So nobody had a reason to accumulate it. And in the Tang Dynasty, there were silk. The silk bolt was a high denomination currency. It had one silk bolt was worth 3,000 coins, which was the ordinary currency. So, and women were making more money than men in that dynasty. So there is a correlation between honoring feminine values and a monetary ecosystem. For the bulk of my career, I have been working in very, very different domains, and typically domains that are mutually exclusive. I believe I'm the only ex-central banker who has managed an offshore currency fund. That doesn't happen in one life. There are probably not many people who have been professors of international finance and who were presidents of electronic payment systems. These are very different careers. I've been working for some of the major multinationals on the planet, and I'm working with some of the poorest countries. So that has given me an insight on money that I was actually not aware of until someone was actually my only mentor I ever had in my life, which is Willis Harman, the founder of the Institute for Noetic Sciences in California. And he told me, Bernard, you have been trained for 25 years to understand money like nobody else ever had the chance to do because of these roles in different communities, the different jobs. You need to write down what you learned. It's going to be useful for other people. So I thought about it a little bit and decided to do it. So that is when I started looking at what's happening in the monetary domain systematically. And that is when I started, that was the beginning in the 1990s, was the beginning of some of the complementary currencies, was the beginning of LEDs, was the beginning of several types of systems that were popping up a little bit all over the place. Still very marginal, and they're still marginal today, but clearly they were there already. So that's how I discovered the systems. I also read a book by Margaret Kennedy that actually showed me the dynamic of negative interest rates, okay, that she got from Silvio Gesell back in the 30s. So I started looking into that and understood the mechanism that was working in matrifocal societies, the role of the mirage charge on not creating on a currency that becomes a pure medium of exchange and not a store of value. So that is the key pieces of the puzzle. Sure. Initially, I had budgeted 3 years in the 1990s to write what I thought I had learned. Okay. And I was planning to actually go back to normal business afterwards. That's not what has happened. The topic doesn't let me go. Something happens in the world, crisis, for example, which, draws me back into the topic. I have not been able to get seriously interested, professionally interested, again in something else. And it's partially my doing, I guess, but it is also what happens to many people that I know that are, once you get into that topic, it's sticky. Well, she took care of the German community, German-speaking community, and with creating an organization that actually provides knowledge sharing between the different communities, bottom up, that are interested in this domain. And so I think that is quite significant. She also wrote a couple of books. And one of the books I read then actually influenced me. So I think, now the frustration I share with her. I also consider that, having invested 20 years now, that there is very little to show for it. The system is still intact. The blockages are still in place. The mechanism by which those blockages happen are still intact, working now. There is complete refusal at senior level, whether it is political or an economic field, to look at this seriously. It has to do with power also, I guess. People who have the monetary power are still the system that was put up 300 years ago is still functioning perfectly. It's very effective. Actually, I think there is something that has changed very recently, in January 2016, okay, that in the long run will make a difference in this. It is the legislation of bail-in. Until now, for the last 300 years, in the capitalist countries, when a bank or a big bank went under, it was saved by the government. And we've seen the last episode of that on a huge scale with 2007, 2008. We're still living with the consequences of that. So, but that's the last time. Because the governments are not in a position, they're not capable, according to the financial system, to save them again. They are not creditworthy anymore. So that's new, okay? And one of the most important legislation that, again, has been coming without much talking about it, the legislation of the bail-in, what it means is that if you have a deposit in a bank of, say, €1 million, and the government guarantees you €100,000 in case of bankruptcy of the bank, the 900,000 belong to the bank. So people with a lot of money are now on the side of people that actually are not going to be happy with the banking system. And I see one of the possibilities that how to get to a monetary ecosystem. One of the possibilities is actually with blockchain, for example. New technology that has been developed to create a Bitcoin, the technology behind the Bitcoin, can be used to monetize, to create a currency out of any physical asset, without having to go through banks, without having to go to notary publics. That's an extraordinary development. And the people billionaires who are intelligent, and there must be some, okay, who, if you want to protect their billion, the last place to put it is in a bank. That's what it means now. And that's new. We've been, for 300 years, been told that the safe place to keep your money is a bank. Well, not anymore. And that will change the nature of the fact that very wealthy people suddenly have the same problem. And when they could invest, say, in gold or in real estate or whatever it is, the gold can be changed into a monetary unit through blockchain. You can actually guarantee that I can have a backing of gold and that I can send it to you without having to go through a bank. Very different. So I'm seeing the possibility that there is new developments there. Actually, I am not optimistic for the future of Bitcoin. I'm optimistic about blockchain. It's not the same thing, okay? Now people associate the two because it's the largest application of blockchains are Bitcoins. But I don't believe, precisely for the reasons that you're saying, it's speculation that it has a big future as a medium of exchange. Actually, if you want to be literal about it, my definition of money, speculation is not part of it. Okay? So the Bitcoin is actually, for me, not a currency. It's not, the very little of it is used for exchanging, very little. So it's mostly for speculation. So it's actually not a good currency from my perspective. On the other hand, the blockchain technology can liberate new forms of currency, and that's happening already. It can be done transparently. The blockchain, what's in the blockchain, everybody can see. You can verify it. I have lost my illusion, I guess, that having the solution is what matters. It doesn't matter. It's absolutely irrelevant. So we will learn again from another crisis. I was hoping to avoid that biggest crisis. I hope, motivated me 20 years ago, more than 20 years ago, was to avoid that situation. And we may not avoid it. The system has been left intact. And that system has created crisis, actually, 425 in 40 years. Why would it stop? Okay? And we could talk very large crises. I think they're getting bigger and bigger. So we're going to have a big one. It could be the dollar one, it could be the euro one. I don't know. Both are still possible. And if we have the euro one, it could be the trigger for the dollar, or if we have the dollar one, it could be the trigger for the euro. So the two can come together. If that happens, it's going to be worse than the 1930s. That's what I wanted to avoid. And we won't avoid it. I don't know when, but I'm actually willing to stick to my guns. I said before 2020. And I still think that it's pretty likely. I don't think we have 10 years. So 2020 sounds like a good date. Before 2020. That's what I was saying 20 years ago. Well, some things have happened. Okay? I'm going to give you the example of what happened in France. Now there is a legislation in place that's been passed in about 2 years ago that makes, for the first time, complementary currencies on a local level, legal. Okay? The big problem from my perspective is that local authorities, local governments or regional governments are not allowed to accept that currency in payment of taxes, even if they issue it themselves, that would be the key. If you have a currency issued by, say, a regional authority, that the regional authority can accept in payment of taxes, you create a loop that closes. If you take away the taxes, the government becomes irrelevant. But that's also true for conventional money. If tomorrow governments decided not to accept euros in payment of taxes, bank debt money would become irrelevant immediately. So the role of government is pretty important. And the taxes are pretty important. Because actually about a third of the economy is required to be paid specifically in bank debt money. So that creates the loop that makes the power of government on the side of the currency. So this is being done in Bristol in England, without having to change laws. That's the advantage of not having Napoleon in your history, I guess. You can try. And Bristol is issuing a currency, the Bristol pound, which is used specifically for local businesses and specifically for energy, for example, green energy, and they can actually dedicate specific purposes for that currency that the government wants to encourage, but you can use that currency for payment of taxes. The loop closes. So we need more Bristols. We need the legislation of France modified that it includes the possibility to accept the currency in payment of taxes, and then we have it. Bristol is an interesting experiment, and of course it's well known that the mayor is behind it, rather spectacularly. He accepts 100% of his salary in payment of taxes. All the employees of the government of Bristol are paid partially in taxes, in Bristol pounds. So, yes, Bristol is the model that I would propose where we can go. Because there is a role for government in the monetary domain. And the only role it can play is related, technically, from a systemic perspective, not just legally, is the tax issue. That is where the power of government is. And that's why the banks are so insisting that they control the government. Because if you control the government, you control the world. They need a second currency, at least a second one, and that is issued by the government, that they could be using to pay pensions and things, and accepted in payment of taxes. That would be the loop. This was something that Varoufakis tried, and he was stopped by the president of the country at the time that it was ready to go. So anyway, so that is where we are with, we had the solution and they're being refused. I think we may have the chance in Italy, I don't know. Italy is, in the Eurozone, probably the most vulnerable party right now. And it would be a lot more expensive than Greece. I would start issuing a second currency. If necessary, it could be backed by commodities. Okay, I don't care. I mean, you know, what matters is the second circuit. And as I said, from an ecosystem viewpoint, it's limited to talk about two. But I would start with the second. Okay? And we need to, let me be complete on that. Too many is also not good. If every citizen started issuing his own currency, it would be total stagnation. Nothing would happen. The economy would stop. So we're talking between 1 and infinity. There is somewhere where there's a reasonable limit. But I would start with a second one, just like Bristol, and I would close the loop. And whatever the form of that currency, doesn't matter. I would go electronic. Okay. Because with mobile phone payments, that is the way to go. And you could actually keep the currency purely in electronic form, not have any of it in form of conventional money, or paper bills and stuff like that. I would completely go electronic. And that's going to be what happens anyway. So I would use the power behind that mechanism to make the transformation. I still believe that we need a euro, and I believe that without the euro, the whole European project would have died in the 90s. Okay, when you had unemployment in Spain at 30%, you would have had a massive devaluation of the peseta had we not had the euro. The French would have felt obliged to follow. And that would be the end of the European project for anything financial in the European Union. Because the transfer of, say, the monies for the agricultural projects or whatever else that we're doing became all irrelevant, had no meaning with starting to have devaluation between the countries within the Eurozone. So we need the euro. Actually, I see the euro as necessary, not only within Europe, but we need a global system. We need a global currency that is nobody's national currency. Okay? I think for avoiding wars. Because having this system enables negotiations, obliges to negotiate, rather than finding solutions on the military side. Okay? Well, we need the euro because if you want to build Europe, have a mechanism to make countries converge, it is necessary to have a currency at that level. Otherwise, well, there is a question of efficiency, and there is a question of the entire political system on compensations through countries, and with the common agricultural policy and all that, wouldn't make any sense if you had the national currencies. Actually, personally, I would have preferred to have the euro and national currencies. So that would be my proposal. That would have been my proposal, but that was not what was politically acceptable at that point. They wanted to stay with a single currency, not a common currency. I believe that a common currency would have been already a multiplication of currencies. It would have the national currency and it would have the euro, and you could live in one of the systems or in both systems or in, And in fact, we have this today. I mean, people seem to object to this, but the United Kingdom, if in the United Kingdom you are a business, you can decide, you can choose to have your balance sheet and your taxes paid in euros or in national currencies, in the pound. And you choose, and every quarter the central bank gives the exchange rate that is applicable for the balance sheets of the businesses that do that. So it's perfectly possible. Okay? And some businesses have an advantage in taking the pound, and some other businesses have the advantage of taking the euro. They could choose. And it would already give a bit of diversity. Of course, they're all the same type of currencies, so it wouldn't go far enough, but it would at least solve problems like Greece, right now, and or like Italy or Spain. There would have been possibility to actually devalue their currency in terms of the euro, which is not possible now. Definitely. Definitely, one can have, well, a common currency makes it possible to solve problems by negotiation more easily than by violence. Now, the problem that I'm seeing is less in the European level now, although historically that certainly was the case. I'm seeing this more on a global level. If there is, if we only have national currencies to deal with, and there is one currency that needs to play the global role, which has been the dollar now since World War II, and which was the British pound before, there is a geopolitical competition for whose currency will become the next global currency. Now, the Chinese is one example. The euro is another one, and the dollar is a third one. Why would it not be possible to have a global currency that is nobody's national currency, okay, and that actually would provide a space that is politically neutral for countries to adhere to? In the scenario that I'm seeing after the change of the dollar rule, the dollar will keep on concentrating on the Western Hemisphere, even Latin America. That is part of the fallback position. But what will happen with India? You know, will they fall into the dollar zone, in the eurozone, or in the Chinese zone in the monetary system? You know, why do we create these potential conflicts, which historically have been the basis for war? Okay, I mean, there has been definitely the United States and England have both done wars to make sure, and actually internally, if you look at France, the way France was built, you had a war and then the king imposed his currency. Okay, that was part, and his tax system. Okay, the two things hang together. You choose the currency and you choose what you tax and how you tax it and how you get paid for it. So I think it would be important to give flexibility in the global geopolitical frame by having a global currency that's nobody's national currency for that reason. The answer is yes to both, and let me explain. Yes, there are currency wars. Okay, actually, there's a well-known Chinese book with that title, for example, the fact of having devaluing the currency during a recession gives the advantage to the currency and to the country that has the currency in terms of international competition. Okay, and if someone in the 1930s, what happened is that one country devalued and then the other one valued as well. So competitive devaluations, which of course go nowhere because, you know, it feeds on each other, but it doesn't solve any problem. So that is currency wars. And there's also an argument for wars that to impose one's currency. Okay, and this has historically been more the case internally, the way France has been built up, the way England has been built up, the way, you know, Germany was not that way, but Italy did. So in other words, you had the zone of monetary influence gives you an advantage from a power perspective. So, yes, I'm concerned about both. We agree that a currency gives an advantage to the country that issues it. Okay, American empire is mostly actually built on that framework. Okay, there has been the global reference currency being the dollar, through oil particularly, it has been an important issue. The common denominator between Saddam Hussein and Gaddafi is that they both wanted to do something about the way they wanted to stop using the dollar to measure the value of oil. That is a common denominator that actually, that's the thing not to do if you want to survive. Okay, so there's definitely a direct link there. Okay, because it's a lot easier for a country that to print money than having to earn foreign exchange to buy your energy. Okay, so there you have the whole issue of America and oil and the price of oil in dollars, which is an example very concretely of that phenomenon happening. Well, you see this mostly in developing, what we call developing countries. Okay, they have to indebt themselves in the foreign currency, and in order to finance imports. And of course, that provides influence on the development style of that country. The IMF has been doing that. You know, with cost of everything except for servicing your debt. Well, you know,
Yes.
there goes your education, there goes your infrastructure and all that stuff. So it definitely has an impact on the capacity for the development of a country. I want to contribute to the peaceful evolution of the consciousness on this planet. And the words are important. Peaceful is one. And that gives you already one motivation for what the monetary dimension. And the consciousness shift as well. I think we are being very limited by not just the quantity, but also the type of money that we are using. We are being locked into a particular value system, which has been a useful basis for development of the world during the Industrial Revolution. I have no problems about that. I think that the Industrial Revolution has been a good thing in terms of material quality of life. But I think if we stick to it now, when we are not in the post-industrial age, we're going to be limiting the possible creativity of humanity. Not to speak of what happens to climate change and things like that, which are possibly going to affect the entire, possibly 1,000 years. I mean, we are really playing with pretty high-powered problems that if we don't solve them quickly now, the consequences could be quite substantial. Yes, I think don't expect the top to solve the problem. There's going to be a very important ingredient of bottom-up energy that self-organizes. It's the only way that I can see realistically to have the changes implemented that are needed. And, well, what are you waiting for? It's going to be affecting your life and the life of your children if we don't solve these problems. I think the world we're living in now is very, very deeply shaped and limited by the money system that we're using. I'm not against it in absolute terms. In fact, I'm saying reform is necessary, but not enough, because the reform will not go deeply enough. While moving to a monetary ecosystem will provide a very, very, very broad range of new capacities that will affect not only the material life, but also the emotional and the spiritual life of humans for many generations to come. And that's the problem that, as youth, you're going to have to solve.